Hello, and welcome everyone to today's Democracy Conversations on Advancing Sustainability. My name is Ellen Knutson, and I am the acting manager for the American Democracy Project at ASCU, the American Association of State Colleges and Universities. I'm so pleased that we're joined today by our colleagues at the University of the Bahamas, Walteria Tucker-Roll, Marcella Elliott-Ferguson, and William Fielding. So looking forward to our conversations and, living, I can speak, I know words, living a little bit of island life for a moment. I should have joined Walteria in changing my background but I am not in the Bahamas. I am in my home office. Before I turn things over to them, I do want to give just a quick announcement, and that is that the American Democracy Project, we're hosting a summit July 13th and 14th in Indianapolis. Our theme is full participation. And what would that look like if we had full participation in our democracy? The registration is open for it. We're putting together a great program. I just confirmed the other day that our opening keynote speaker is going to be Shamichael Holman, who is a great speaker on the role of sort of civic spaces and how we develop civic spaces in our communities. And I hope that you'll consider joining us there. I will pop some information, a link to the website about the summit in chat. But now, because you did not come here to listen to me, I'm going to turn things over to my good friend Walteria to get us started with the conversation on what's been going on at the University of the Bahamas.
Thank you, Ellen. Good afternoon, colleagues from wherever you are in the States and in the world. I come to you from my virtual beach. Not that I'm in my office, but we are excited to bring you greetings from the University of the Bahamas. We have two instructional sites, two campuses. One, our main one that's here at Oaks Field on the island of New Providence in Nassau, which is the capital of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And so I'm delighted to be here with my colleagues, Dr. Marcella Elliott-Ferguson, who is our Vice President of Enrollment Management and Athletics, and with Mr. William Fielding, who is an institutional researcher in the Office of Institutional Strengthening and Accreditation, a noted researcher on many topics of great import, including the stray dog population of the Bahamas, which we lovingly call pot cakes. So I would say about Dr. Elliott-Ferguson, she's also a noted expert in risk management and disaster preparedness here in the Bahamas. We're delighted to have her in her key position as one of our vice presidents, but we lucked out with having such a noted figure in this way. So we are all actually joining you from a number of, Marcella's actually demonstrating for us the archipelagic nature of the Bahamas, in that she is currently located on which island, Marcella?
Exuma.
So she's in Exumas, where we'd all like to be. But nevertheless, we are here and we'd like to tell you a little bit about our experience in that lovely academic year, which we all know as 2019, 2020, in which we had the twin experiences of, excuse me, please just confirm that you're seeing my screen okay?
Yes.
Okay.
But it's
still in
presenter mode.
Okay, yeah. I'm sorry. I'm going to jump out of that. Okay, it wants to go there for some reason, but I will but just to tee you up, we are in 1920, as you know, the year to change all years. We had not only what we all know to happen in March 2020, but before that, the Bahamas was struck with the most devastating hurricane on record, I think, for the entire hemisphere for ever. And we know it is Hurricane Dorian. Now, today we're going to talk to you about how it's still doing that thing, Ellen. I think it's still doing the thing. Are you still seeing the presenter view?
Yes. Did you try slideshow?
Yes, I did.
I think if you go to
Better
set
click.
up slideshow and then say, view
Thank
full
you.
screen or view in a window
Thank
rather
you.
than presenter view, that will.
Yes, set up slideshow. Ah, there we go.
There you go.
Full screen.
Browse
Present
an
by
individual,
browse.
browse an individual window.
Perfect. Perfect. Let's try it again. I'm smart. Bam. We're good. Okay,
Awesome.
so, but colleagues, academic year 1920 was interesting for us, not just because of the pandemic, which happened in the spring of 2020, but we had the tragedy known as Dorian, Hurricane Dorian. And so today, what we want to do is walk you through a little bit of how we lived through this experience of not only bracing for impact, but we'll take you through what we actually did and what we've learned from that, with the hopes that you can take from our experience some things that we think can serve you as your institutions face different kinds of natural disasters, and what we would recommend for helping you and your institution to live that process in an equitable manner, impact your communities, and thrive afterwards. Okay, so this is what we hope to accomplish today. Just to give you a bit of an overview about the Bahamas itself. I don't want to assume that all of you have lots of knowledge of the Bahamas, but the Bahamas is officially known as the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. It's an archipelago, right? We're just 30 minutes in a 30-minute flight ride away from Florida. So there's a joke amongst Bahamians that Florida is one of the family islands. It is not uncommon for Bahamians to travel back and forth regularly from Florida to do all sorts of things. The population of the Bahamas, small nation, about 400,000. And as I said earlier, their capital is Nassau, and it's located on the island of New Providence. Now, just to give you an idea, the Bahamas, it has about 700 islands and keys. So we don't want you to think of us as people think of Jamaica as the island, but we are multiple islands. And as the National University of the Bahamas, we have to think in a way that we're looking at multiple islands and those communities, different and diverse as they are, in the way that we fulfill our mission. So we have our main campus that's located here in Oaks Field in Nassau, but we also have a second site in Grand Bahama, and Freeport specifically in Grand Bahama, where we have UB North. So just some general information about both campuses. So as I said, they're located on 2 different islands. We have roughly a little under 4,200 students here, and a little under 500, excuse me, at UB North. Full-time faculty there, about 30 of them, right, in total. So I'm sorry, just want to move ahead here. And as you can see, the island of Grand Bahama, particularly, not a huge place, 95 miles long, 15 miles wide at its widest. And to give you an idea also of scale of our main campus, the island on which our main campus it's 21 miles long. And what is it, 7 miles wide. So we are quite, there's lots that can happen on an island. And so it's super developed. Grand Bahama, if you've ever visited Grand Bahama, it has American style wide roads. And even a Pollo Tropical, for those of you who are in the southeastern United States and know that food chain. And again, we're 30 minutes away from Florida. Now, Grand Bahama, this is also for you to know, Grand Bahama at its highest is 40 feet above sea level, at its highest point. And so this detail is important when we consider how we prepare for storms. As you know, given our proximity to Florida and given our location here just outside of the Caribbean, right? We are prone to hurricanes and prone specifically to lots of climate change events. And so we live them in a very particular way. It's a part of our culture. It's a part of our normal life. We understand that from the time hurricane season opens in June and closes in November, we live in a state of mental sort of preparedness for these phenomena. But as a university, we want to talk to you about how Dorian was a little different. And with that, I invite William Fielding to continue.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. When we're thinking about sort of disasters and perhaps preparing for them as best we can, obviously there are some things that are not really part of our plan, but are sort of assumed in the plan. And obviously, as it will become evident as we go on, the buildings which we actually call our campus, our instructional buildings, they are, if you like, a given. That's what we have. And obviously, if we're in the position of putting up a new building, we can try and build for resilience as best we can, given the information that we have available to us at the time. And the particular building that that used to constitute UB North was a relatively new building. It had been opened in 2011, and it was built with the full knowledge that it was in an area which may be subject to flooding. And so it was built up on a 6-foot platform to protect it from potential floods. As you just saw on that previous slide, Grand Bahama is relatively flat. And so obviously from the experiences of other storms, we would know that Grand Bahama does flood. So flooding was deemed to be a potential risk. And so to mitigate that, it was built up on a substantial platform, which obviously, of course, added to the cost of the building, but was felt to be a reasonable expense, given the fact that the place is relatively flat. And we should perhaps remember that the Bahamas tends to get, I suppose, on average, maybe one hurricane or tropical storm passing through it each year. The Bahamas is quite an interesting place because it's 95% water. So it's a large number of scattered islands, with most of the country being actually water. So that's why the news constantly talks about hurricanes and storms passing through the Bahamas, but quite often they don't actually do a great deal of damage because they're within the sort of the waters of the Bahamas, but may not pass over any particular island. The building that we were talking about, of course, was built, as we would like to imagine, was built to the building code in place at the time. And of course, because we are in a hurricane-prone area, our building code is really quite substantial. And we tend to build with concrete, with the good, with roofs of asphalt, shingled roofs, which are quite good for hurricanes. And in this case, we actually had an aluminium roof, which is probably even better. However, having said that, the insurance assessment actually said that the building was severely damaged. Now, one of the problems, that we've faced with Hurricane Dorian is that if you could just go back a little bit, please. Okay, thank you. So given what I've just said about our experience with hurricanes, we do have plans in place, and these would be, if you like, our normal procedures that we would follow. So I'm not going to bore you with giving you a lengthy document about that, but if we look at the next slide, we will see that in sort of paragraph 2, item 2, we will see that all these things here make perfect sense, that the staff and departments should shut down the offices. We back up our computer data, we close our windows and doors and so on, and we cover everything with plastic in case there should be a leak in the roof. And the security people do their due diligence and checks to make sure that everybody is accounted for at the start of a storm. What we should notice here is this little line saying prior to tropical storm conditions. If you're familiar with hurricanes, you'll remember that typically there are what we call watches and warnings put out for a tropical storm or a hurricane. A watch is issued 48 hours, 2 days in advance, and then a warning is issued 36 hours in advance, and you get these rather frightening announcements saying, you know, you must rush for completion and take care of life and limb and all that good stuff. So there are warnings that should be issued, and I think what's important in writing plans or having or looking at plans is, does your plan depend upon someone else's taking action? So if there are no tropical storm watches or warnings put up, and a storm is evidently coming towards you, or some other disaster is coming towards you, do you actually do nothing until these other people act? And this becomes quite important for us with Hurricane Dorian, because if you go to the next slide, you will see that not only was it an enormous storm, something that we have not experienced, and I believe it was the very first Category 5 storm to ever go to Grand Bahama. It's had a number of Class 4 storms, but not a Class 5 storm. And if you're familiar with hurricanes, you will know that a Category 5 is the maximum class of storm. And Hurricane Dorian was really off the scale when it came to wind speeds. It was an enormous. It looks more like a glorified typhoon, tornado, if you like, than a hurricane. So it was really very powerful, and it was really very, very large. And of course, associated with the hurricane is a storm surge. And what you'll see from this graph here, this picture here, is that it didn't move very fast. You can see how those Monday 8 p.m. and Monday 9 p.m. Sorry, 8 p.m. a.m. and p.m. It hasn't moved very far. So it was pretty much stationary as well, which added to its destructive power. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see that one of the problems with Dorian is that it did not do what it was supposed to do. As you can imagine, the Bahamas does not have the ability or the resources, if you like, to forecast where hurricanes go. We don't have the supercomputers and so on that you need. So we depend upon other people's weather forecasts, for which we are very grateful. But you can see here, Dorian, rather fooled, didn't do what the forecasters expected. On the Tuesday, it was supposed to come up towards the Bahamas as a tropical storm, and it was probably going to go over Grand Bahama, but only as a tropical storm. And you can see in the left-hand picture there that the little S's are some distance apart from each other, showing that it's a fairly fast-moving storm. So really, the plans that we have would deal with that quite well, and we wouldn't be, in a sense, too worried about that. I always get frightened with storms personally, but that's just me. But what happened, of course, if we look in the right-hand picture, we see that it became a major storm. They soon changed their minds about that. And you'll see that the cluster of the M's are very close, indicating how it slowed down. And it passed directly over the islands of Abaco and Grand Bahama. And you can see that where Nassau is located has got a little red dot. It's got a red ring around it, so that we were under a oath watch at that stage. But what you will notice is on the Tuesday there are no watches or warnings put up for the Bahamas. They stop over Hispaniola. And so really we see the storm coming, but there's no need for us to actually do anything, if you like, at that stage. But come a few days later, things have gone somewhat awry. So if we look at the next slide, this is our initial response to getting things moving. So we activated what we have a disaster committee, and there are obviously two elements in a disaster response. One is the property, and then of course the other, and perhaps even more important, is the university community, because as you saw from the previous slide, there's nowhere really to evacuate people from. If you're on a small island and a large storm comes, where do you go? You can't really evacuate. You can't go very far. So what you will see is that for whatever reason, there were no watches and warnings put up until it was really quite late. And so the university actually took preemptive action to close on Friday. It sent out a notice on the Thursday afternoon saying it was going to be closed on Friday. But as you can see, very quickly, it revised that and sent out another notice saying that it was going to close on Thursday evening. And so this goes to show you the fast pace at which things were changing, and the university administration had to work very, very hard to try and make people and the place safe as possible. And you'll notice it's only on the Friday after the university has already taken its own action that the government put up some watches and warnings for the rest of the for the island. So this was our initial response, and you can see the devastation caused by the flooding. We won't. You can see what it looked like before, and if you remember. If you remember where that picture that we had earlier, the site of the campus, which is a little bit outside of Freeport, is well in the now blued area of the floodplain that resulted as a result coming from the storm. So you can see the island completely changes its shape, if you like, temporarily as a result of the flooding. So the flooding was a major component of this disaster. And as they often remind us, it's the water that does the damage, less so the wind. And you can certainly see that in this case here. There's not much left in that bottom picture to show you what it was like on Monday morning. So the impact of the hurricane, there's a slight mistake on this slide, I'm afraid. The number of deaths was estimated about 250. So that's not 250,000, 250. But there was a lot of confusion over these deaths because in some parts of Abaco, which was the island that was hit beforehand, there were a number of undocumented communities, shall we say. We have there's an illegal immigrant population there, and so we simply don't know how many of those people died there. But it was quite for a country of our size, 250 people dying in one day is an awful lot. And so we have a number of deaths, and the importance of this will be seen later on as well when it comes to the psychological harm to the students and staff at the university. Obviously, the infrastructure itself was compromised, particularly the utilities, electricity, and so on would have been, and water would have been disrupted, and you had a lot of homes destroyed, particularly particularly due to floods, and even well-built houses would have been flooded along the bottom. And then we had a large displacement of people, not only from their houses, but people actually moved out of Grand Bahama afterwards because In many respects, the place or large areas of it were uninhabitable. And so when it came to the university in particular, the campus itself was destroyed, and as you can imagine, persons were traumatized, and people are still traumatized to this day. And so there's an awful lot of pieces to be picked up, not only physically, but also mentally. And with that, I'll hand over to Marcella to try and show how we picked up the pieces.
Yes, thank you. I guess we could just, we don't have a time to pause, but if you look at the devastation, that's just a touch of what we would have gone through. And so picking up the pieces meant that there were a lot of pieces to pick up. And if you can move on, I will also show you a little bit of the UB North campus. And it essentially was flooded to the second floor, and we only have 2 floors. And so even though some of the structure might have remained in place, it really was no longer fit for use. Our residential campus, which is not shown here, also was not fit for use. And so I guess the biggest thing we had to do was to remain in contact with our community. And in order to do that, we really used social media, primarily because some of the infrastructure on that island and in Abaco was not functioning or was very limited. And so we used social media, which turned out to be our saving grace. There was still telephone services, but mainly we contacted persons through social media. It was important for us to assess trauma. And we did that through a number of ways. We did that through the standard ways, which would be the surveys. And we surveyed numerous times our students, our staff, and our faculty. We got numerous surveys. But I would also like to say that there was another level of assessment, which was more intimate, more personal. And we called. We had, I might call 3 people, and those 3 people had to essentially make contact with others. And so the assessment wasn't only in the normal official way that we do research, but it was also that personal, intimate touch. Sadly, of our students who we surveyed, a number of them lost family and friends. So that's about 5%. Considerable number of them had a lot of damage to their homes. And imagine, almost 50% of them had lack of water, drinking water and water for sanitary purpose. So that was something that we had to address as we move forward. We ended up, of course, canceling classes. We canceled outstanding student debt. And so essentially what we were saying is, what can the university do? Whatever we were able to do, we will do it. We extended the semester because, of course, at the moment of impact, everything was shut down. We had to allow for students to withdraw without academic penalty. And like I mentioned, we surveyed our community. We also established a relief fund and to allow persons from the Bahamas and abroad, our international colleagues were able to support as much as they can. We really got assistance from the other universities, and that was so heartwarming for us. Many of them reached out to us to say, how can we help? Some of them provided tuition support. Some of them provided accommodations. Some of our students were able to temporarily transfer to the other universities so that they can continue their education. And we wanted and we welcomed that opportunity because some students were so traumatized, they wanted to really just get out. And so those who were willing to stay, they stayed. Those who needed to get out, there were facilities in place for that, of course, for which we are grateful. Continuing, the senior executives visited the campus, of course, numerous times. We were able to secure, the campus president at the time was able to secure a building in the downtown Grand Bahama area, which is Freeport, that had not suffered the type of damage where our campus is located. We supported, we sent supplies, we upgraded technology. So essentially, even though the Grand Bahama community of the university was affected, the entire University of the Bahamas diverted resources to Grand Bahama to ensure that we were operational. And so we rented classes, we rented lab space, we ended up using a school there to facilitate some of our labs. Counseling services was a must. And again, we offered persons not only to relocate to international universities that extended that, but we also offered them to relocate to Nassau, our main campus, if they needed to as well. We set up donation pages. We sought assistance from NEMA, which is at the time, our National Emergency Management Agency, and other NGOs. We moved our library services online. We secured the campus to mitigate against any further damage or theft. So even though it appeared to be like, there's not much left, there's always something. And so we wanted to protect that campus. We provided on a consistent basis care packages for our employees and our students. And I personally know, so this occurred in September, I personally am aware of packages still being sent into January, February. We would say, are you guys okay? That was the question. Whenever you reach somebody, are you okay? How are you doing? What can we do? And we continued to just send items until it leveled off, because of course there are a number of NGOs who assisted, but we wanted to know that if we can assist our own, we would be the first ones out the gate to do that. We were happy that a number of our support services were already in the virtual environment. And so transitioning our technical stuff was already in the cloud, our financial records, our student records. So that was the easiest recovery. It was really dealing with the trauma of students that that hit us really hard. There was academic impact, but interestingly, not as much as you might think. So if you look at the previous semesters, the fall 2019, the red highlighted one is when the disaster occurred. We saw an increase in students who wanted to withdraw. And remember, we allowed them that opportunity without any penalties. And if you look at the same thing, the grades basically managed to remain the same. So if you look at the spring before, the fall, and the spring following, which was a COVID environment, our students maintained around the same in terms of their academic. So we were pleasantly surprised, but I think that can be attributed to the amount of support that we gave, not only to the students, but to our faculty as well, who had to, through their stress, through their trauma, still had to deliver quality education. And so we were grateful for that. Post-hurricane now, we tried to restore some type of normality. It's been many years later, and some of us are still going through that. In preparation for this, my colleagues and I talked about colleagues in Grand Bahama who are still traumatized, who have relocated from the Grand Bahama campus to the New Providence campus. Mental health was a major thing. We provided these services, but as you can imagine, some people take advantage of them and some don't take advantage of them immediately. They're a little tougher, but the impacts continue into months and years ahead. And so some of them continue to seek support. We provided as much as we can. What we wanted to do was to build a sense of community. And I think that was the important thing. How can we support you? We will support you. Tell us how. And it's not a 1 day or 1 month, it continues. And we, like I said, we canceled debt for students for that semester. We even also had some additional financial support for subsequent semesters, specifically for the Grand Bahamian students who we know would be going through a time. Some of us feared that, maybe we will have no endpoint. We remember the Bhopal gas leak in India. And in some cases, we say, what is the end of this? When will this end? And so moving forward, how do you plan for the worst case scenario? So we talked about how in the construction of the building in 2011, it was raised. How high should we have raised it? We had it built on a platform of 6 feet. And if it was 10 feet, If we had raised it 15 feet, the storm surge was over 28 feet. So how strong is strong? How high is high enough? That is something that we still grapple with. How do you balance your space allocation needs with your disaster preparedness? How do we coexist with safety? So you want to put all these safety measures in place, but at the end of the day, there's also funding and other things to prepare for. So what did we do? We actually moved the campus. We now have opened a new campus in the downtown area, which is on a higher level than the UB North campus was. We still maintain that property. We're going to use that property for research, but we recognize with the climate change, we are going to be impacted. And so remaining in that area, that low-lying area, was no longer feasible. So we have moved into a newer campus that's on a higher elevation. And so our takeaways, I guess there were many, but a plan is just a plan. You've got to be flexible. So whatever is coming your way, you have a plan, you plan for it, but you must always be flexible, because if we had not pivoted, if we had not gotten ahead of it, I think we would have really been worse off than we were. Change is difficult. You know, we have persons who were crying, and I'm not talking on the day, I'm talking months later. If you bring up a topic, you see people tear up. Change is difficult. Going through that experience is difficult. And even coming out of it and still expected to perform, whether you are an employee, whether you are a student, you're still expected to carry on with life. And that's difficult to do. Necessity is the mother of invention. That was another takeaway. And we found, I guess we might have inherently known it, but we demonstrated our resilience. And it is something that through it all, I think we are most proud of, that we were very resilient and supportive, okay? We had to review all of our processes, all of our operations. So, you know, post-mortem, what have we done? What would we do differently if this were to come again? There are persons who have said they will not remain in Grand Bahama if there's a storm coming. They will jump on a flight, go elsewhere. There are those who say, well, what else can the university have done? Do we lock up, shut down, and move out? And of course, we don't want to. We are important to that community. We've got a huge number of alumni. And so not only our current students, but our extended community depends on us. And so we needed to make sure that we remain there and we'll be able to continue to assist. We need to be futuristic in our thinking. And I'm going to say that and leave that because, of course, there's a lot going on with climate change and the impacts that weather has on our landscape, on our geography, on our topography. So we need to be futuristic. And in some cases, being futuristic doesn't only mean preparing the university campus, but being futuristic can also mean, how do we prepare the nation? How do we prepare the international community to help prevent some of these things that are going on? I guess our last takeaway, we reworked the plan and build capacity. So we needed to have more persons trained. We needed to have more persons ready with training, certifications, etc., to do what needs to do. So at this point, I am going to pass it to my colleague Walteria for continuation.
Thank you, William and Marcella. Colleagues, I want to note that Marcella and William, you know, are quite modest in the way that they've approached sort of talking through today's exercise, but Marcella, being the emergency response and disaster preparedness expert that she is, was actually working during Dorian on two fronts.
Yes.
She was helping to guide. She was the co-lead of that task force that mobilized the university's resources to respond properly, to prepare and then to respond, and then the aftermath. She co-led that. with our then VP of Operations, as well as she would go away from UB to work on the response for those particular islands most impacted by Hurricane Dorian. And so their experiences of her experience of this particularly, it's very telling, and we consider ourselves super privileged to have her at UB to provide that national perspective. And so this idea of university and its role in the nation and the community, our mission is, to advance and expand access to higher education and to promote academic freedom, to drive national development, and to build character through teaching, learning, research, scholarship, and service. And so we are an access institution. We are about making sure that the Bahamas, archipelagic as it is, that we provide an equitable experience and access to education and an educational experience to all the archipelago. And so UB North, as Marcella mentioned, yes, you're talking about a campus. It doesn't make financial sense for us to leave a campus here or to rebuild it as we did. We rebuilt it. We rebuilt it and reopened that campus in fall of 2024. And so we're happy to have UB North back open again with a physical presence. As Marcella said, we were able to restore operations virtually in the virtual environment for them pretty quickly and then transition to some temporary measures. But right now we have a full-fledged campus back there, not because just for the value to UB, but we understand the role of the university in national development. We understand the importance of the campus in Grand Bahama, particularly for the entire northern Bahamas, because there are islands in the north where parents won't necessarily send their students to the capital city, the big city, as it were. And so we recognize the importance of making sure that we provided access for those people so that the Northern Bahamas also felt a part of what we do as a university. And William, just to round out this whole idea of the other portion of our mission is to take what we've learned from these experiences to focus our research on things that matter for the Bahamas. And so William worked with a number of other colleagues and produced the Dorian study from which he quoted today. And I'm sure he can make that available to you. And for those of you who are interested in learning more about it, he's an absolute resource to talk about this sort of history and some finer points of this experience. But I want to stop here and to see, what you can take away from what we've taken away. And we hope that you will learn from our example. And we want, to speak some hope into your lives. I know that in many of your communities, you're dealing with other types of natural disasters. We too deal with fires here, not just flooding and hurricanes, but we do deal with wildfires here. It's the season for it, and we're in the process of, controlling them on a number of islands at this point in the Bahamas. And so, but we feel with you and for you with addressing these things. And we want you to know you are resilient, you can address it, and you should address it for the good, not just of your institutions, but for the good of the communities that you serve. And so with that, I'll stop there. Ellen, help me out here. How much time do we have? And does anybody have any questions for our presenters?
Absolutely. We have about 10 minutes left. If folks have questions, please feel free to pop them into chat, or we're a small group, you can take yourself off of mute. In the meantime, I might ask if you could say a little more about that way that you were, sort of supporting and rebuilding community, right? And how you talked a little bit about how UB North is, holds a special place for folks who are living on Grand Bahama and in the North. Can you just elevate a little bit more on that sort of civic role that you saw the university and that specific campus playing?
Marcella and William, please do, and I'll round it out. Please do. Go ahead.
Well, I think the thing that we embodied, though we may have said it, is take care of you and then take care of you. And so we recognized that our students have so many behind them, their families, their friends, their groups, the communities. And so the support was that, yes, we want to support our campus, we want to support our institution, we want institution to continue to exist in the North. But more than that, we needed the people to know that we are vested in you, we are vested in this community. And so the reach was as much as we could. The reach was as far as we could. Some of it was monetary, some of it was items, some of it was counseling, some of it, let's just have a cup of tea, let's sit and talk. Even those students that would have transferred into Providence, if of them would have popped to my office, I said, just sit and have a tea. You know, if you want to talk, can. If you don't want, that's fine. So, you know, from regard, we just wanted the grand community to know we are vetted here, we remain with you.
And what's cool about that too, I'll say this, and William, you could jump in perhaps on this. What's cool about that is when we rebuilt UB North, it was the community that came through to help us. It was people understanding that leaving Grand Bahama without access to the National University was tantamount to contributing to what could have been a brain drain. I mean, this is making sure that our students, that young people who are graduating from the high schools on that island, and you know, Freeport particularly in Grand Bahama is called the nation's second city. And so the message that we send to the nation in leaving the second city alone without a UB presence, or without trying to restore, as it were, not just our institution, as Marcella is saying, but we impact the whole K-16 system, right? There are implications for making sure that access to higher ed on those islands remains consistent and even increases, because the socioeconomic fabric of those islands rests on, you know, the preparedness of its workforce, the education. So we're talking the long game, right? And, you know, we don't want to leave Grand Bahama in the situation where you don't have a skilled workforce. You don't have people with sufficient training to continue the community, like the existence, the running of the place. And so we feel that need, particularly that responsibility as an institution, particularly. You can't just leave Grand Bahama alone, because you're sending that, you would be sending the message to the nation that we're leaving the nation alone. And so we had that national imperative. William, you got anything else you want to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, that I think going back to the idea of trying to help people restore their lives to some sort of normality, I think it's worthwhile noting that the physical plant people from UB North actually went to the homes of staff and faculty to help them remove the debris from their own physical space in which they went home to, because when you're surrounded by destruction, you go you can no longer go to your office because that's destroyed. You go to a temporary building while it's still very temporary, and then you come back to your ruined garden or whatever. This just, you know, there's no escaping that initial run through, if you like, of trauma. So these were other ways in which the university reached out to helping people. And I think what is also significant is that remember the hurricane arrived on the 6th the 1st of September. On the 6th of September, the vice president for UB North at the time issued a very long statement outlining the plan that he was formulating to get things ready to restart classes on the 30th of September. So there was a very definite plan that was shared and put in place to show that we are not giving up. We've got a plan to recover, and we're going to be starting classes in different places, but we're going to keep going. We're not being blown off course by this trauma. And you know, even it said quite clearly, we're going to restart classes on the 30th of September. We're going to run the classes for 10 weeks until the 8th of December. Final grades will be submitted on the 5th of January. It was all marked out so people could start to remap their lives so they could see that, in a sense, they were, those almost going back to work, going back to the classroom becomes a distraction from the disaster, and so that becomes a way of healing and restoring normality, which I think is a key thing that we need to think about. What do we do after the disaster to get people back on track as best we can?
Great. And then your slides are no longer in front of me, so now I'm going on
I can put them back up if you need me to.
Oh, no.
Okay.
It's just I may misparaphrase. But one of your takeaways I saw was about being future focused, right? So I'm wondering if we could just end on how you are seeing the future of UB, especially in regards to how you prepare for climate change, support your community through these challenges.
Marcella, William,
That
yes. Marcella and William, I'm kind of, because I know that William and I have been working on looking at aspects of the master planning and some of the strategic projects that we have with building infrastructure, key infrastructure. I'm wondering if, from that perspective, you could speak to how the campus is addressing that, or Marcella, either one of you can go from there, and maybe I round it off. Let's see.
Well, okay. Well, Marcella is smiling. We can't hear her, so perhaps I could start. I mean, I think the longer term picture has to be to go back to looking at infrastructure, how we build buildings. Even though we've got quite a good building code, there was a lot of discussion as to how the nation should change its building code to make buildings more resilient. That, of course, puts up the cost, obviously, of building. And so there's a balance there between affordability and building resilience. How do you manage the two? How do you balance the two? But that's clearly something that has to be addressed. There's not much that you can do about the elevation. You're stuck with the topography that you have. As you've noticed, what the UB has done was to move its main focus, its main location for instruction from where it was into a place that is literally higher off the ground. And so that's obviously an advantage, because you never know, although 20 or 30 feet of storm surge hopefully will be rare. When we're looking at these major disasters, as we said before, how high is high enough? So again, there's a limit as to how high you can go, obviously, but at least you can move things in the most sensible direction. So that's clearly, I think one way. And then, of course, in the wider scheme of things, you're still talking about environmental change, and that's evident for us in as much that if you look at the frequency of hurricanes that we've experienced in the Bahamas, it clearly has been increasing over the long term. So the number of hurricanes, let alone, I mean, if you just look here between 1900 and 1949, there were about 3 major storms in the Bahamas, and in the 2020s alone, we've had 5. So you can see that number of storms is clearly increasing. So their frequency is there. So there's that resiliency in terms of the building, and you might argue that if you know you're living in a stronger building, that also helps you to deal with the trauma, because the roof's not going to be blown off, and so you feel a little bit safer. So I think that's a clear thing that we need to work towards and also bear in mind that water is the big danger with these storms. And of course, if we think of what's happened in some of the in Central America, there was a tropical storm, and it was just a tropical storm. He says very benignly, and it killed thousands of people because of the water, not because of the wind.
Mm-hmm.
Additionally, I think in terms of planning, we've realized that there is no going back. And so from our operations, from the way we deliver our courses, so we deliver our education, we are now we pivot immediately. And of course, this was brilliant. And on the heels of that, the COVID-19. So we pivot immediately, but we realize that this is built into our normal operational way we do things. So we now have more of our classes that are online, and in those that are completely online, we have a considerable amount that is now of mixed modality. And so that gives a little sense sure that if we can't meet in person, we know how to in place so that we continue to deliver quality education. And I think that's how we move futuristically. Of course, we are heavily dependent on our IT department, I'm sure as many would understand, so that, you know, we diverted resources. I remember the vice president at the time, but he was like, okay, so you're going to take up our budget because, you know, there was no person. And so we need to make sure that we thought and operate from a future perspective. So they're going back in that sense. Yeah.
And our Office of University Relations, I should say, has been tremendous in sort of how it has really helped to ramp up our sensitivity towards the communication needs of our communities. And so William mentioned earlier about the address that was, you know, sort of communicated at that point from that particular vice president. But in our more recent experiences of storms or events that looked as if, you know, of course, at the level of policy, the university has always opted to be more cautious than not. We had a storm earlier in this academic year or something that looked, it was a tropical storm, but because it was going to hit or impact that particular island, the island of Grand Bahama, knowing our people's needs, we erred on the side of the most caution possible, making space for giving ourselves as much room, right, to accommodate, because it is impossible to control what happens. But what we can do is make sure that we're putting ample padding around in communications, in policies, so that our people can get back to normal as quickly as possible and as healthily as possible. So it's that. So thank you, Ellen,
Terrific.
and thank you everyone for the opportunity to share.
Yes, and thank you, Walteria, Marcella, and William for spending some time with us today. It's been great and informative. This is our final democracy conversation of the semester. And I think we wrapped up with a great one. The recording will be posted on AskU's website. So for the folks who wanted to come and registered but couldn't make it, they'll be able to watch it at their leisure. And again, thank you so much. We very much appreciate you.